The alarm sounded at 3 a.m. in Manhattan, and Sarah Mitchell was already on her feet before the second ring echoed through the station. 15 years as a firefighter had trained her body to respond even before her mind had fully processed the alert. She descended the pole with the agility of someone who had repeated that movement thousands of times, her heart racing not from nervousness, but from pure, controlled adrenaline. The call was for a fire in a 40-story residential skyscraper in Midtown, and the first radio transmission already indicated that it would be unlike anything she had faced before. The truck cut through the deserted streets of New York with sirens blaring, and Sarah watched from the window as the night horizon began to glow with an ominous orange hue. When they finally arrived at the scene, it was pure chaos. Flames licked the windows between the 15th and 22nd floors, tongues of fire dancing against the dark sky like hungry demons. People screamed from the upper windows, some desperately waving clothes, others simply frozen in terror. The team captain began issuing orders quickly, but Sarah was already assessing the situation with her own experienced eyes. The building structure was one of the most ambitious architectural projects of the 90s, with a design that prioritized aesthetics over safety functionality. The emergency stairwells converged at central points that were now completely engulfed in flames. The sprinkler system had failed catastrophically, and the fire was spreading with frightening speed, fueled by building materials that did not meet modern codes. Sarah knew they had minutes, perhaps only seconds, before the situation became completely untenable. She immediately volunteered to lead the first internal rescue team. Her call sign, Eagle 7, was known throughout the department, not only for its technical precision, but for its almost supernatural ability to assess risks and make split-second decisions. As she climbed the stairs with her team, the heat intensified with each flight. The breathing equipment weighed heavily on her shoulders, but she maintained a steady pace, checking every corridor, every apartment, searching for lives that could still be saved. On the 12th floor, she found an entire family locked in a bathroom, the mother hugging 3 small children as smoke seeped under the door. Sarah forced her way through with a swift blow and quickly led everyone to the still passable stairwell. On the 13th floor, an elderly man in a wheelchair waited alone in his apartment, resigned to his fate. She carried him on her back, down 2 flights of stairs before handing him over to another firefighter who was going up. Radio communication was frantic. Other teams reported structural collapses on the upper floors. The fire had completely consumed the 20th floor and was advancing both upwards and downwards. Sarah made a decision that defied all protocols. Instead of evacuating with the survivors she had already rescued, she would continue upwards. Her instinct told her that there were more people trapped on the intermediate floors, those whom everyone presumed already lost. She found 17 residents on the 14th floor, huddled in a dead-end corridor, the smoke so thick they could barely see their own hands. Sarah organized a human chain, positioning each person with their hand on the shoulder of the person in front, creating a line that she herself led through the suffocating darkness. Her instructions were clear and calm, each word spoken with the authority of someone who had no time for questions. They descended together, one cautious step at a time, while the building groaned and creaked around them. On the 16th floor, she discovered something that chilled her blood. A daycare was operating illegally in the building, and 23 children were trapped inside with 2 terrified staff members. Flames blocked the only viable exit. Sarah quickly assessed her options. The window overlooked an inner courtyard, and the rescue team had positioned an aerial ladder, but the angle was precarious. She began to move the children one by one to the window, instructing the staff members on how to hold them firmly while the firefighters outside reached them. A sudden explosion on the floor above sent a shower of debris down the hallway. Sarah shielded the last child with her own body, feeling fragments of concrete ricochet off her equipment. When she finally delivered the girl to safety, her back ached with pain, but she couldn't stop. There were still entire floors unchecked. The structure was beginning to give way. Support beams groaned with a sound every firefighter learns to fear, that primal warning that the building was losing its integrity. Central Command ordered a complete evacuation. All teams were to leave immediately. Sarah confirmed the order by radio, but as she descended, she heard something that made her heart clench. A muffled scream coming from behind a locked door on the 18th floor. She disregarded the direct order and forced her way in. Inside, she found a group of 9 college students who had been partying and had fallen unconscious from the smoke before they even realized the danger. Sarah began dragging them down the hallway, one at a time, slapping their faces and yelling for them to wake up. Some responded, others remained unconscious. She didn't have the time or physical strength to carry them all, so she made another impossible decision. Using ropes from her equipment, she tied them together and began dragging them like a human train through the burning hallway. Her back screamed in protest. Her lungs burned even with the breathing apparatus. But Sarah Mitchell wasn't the type of person to abandon lives that could still be saved. She pulled that group through hell, inch by inch, refusing to give up. When she finally reached the stairs, other firefighters climbed up against orders to help her. Together, they descended with the students, some already beginning to cough and regain consciousness. The battle against the fire lasted 6 hours. When the sun finally rose over Manhattan, the building was a charred shell, the upper floors completely destroyed, but no lives had been lost. 164 people had been successfully evacuated, and Sarah Mitchell had personally rescued or assisted in the rescue of 109 of them. She was covered in soot, exhausted to the point of barely being able to stand, but alive. The following weeks were a whirlwind. The media hailed her as a heroine. Television programs wanted to interview her. Politicians wanted to take pictures with her. Sarah refused everything, insisting that she had only done her job and that the entire team deserved recognition. But something was changing inside her, something she couldn't fully articulate. The pain in her back wouldn't go away. Doctors discovered she had fractured 2 vertebrae when she shielded that child from the explosion. The recovery would be long. She might never be able to return to active duty. Sarah faced this reality with the same quiet determination that had always characterized her. If she could no longer enter burning buildings, she would find another way to serve. She began working with the training department, sharing her experiences with new recruits. Her lectures were legendary, not only because they contained valuable technical knowledge, but because she spoke with the authority of someone who had actually been there, who knew the true weight of each decision. 3 years after the skyscraper fire, Sarah received an unexpected invitation. Fire department chiefs from across the metropolitan area were holding a special recognition ceremony. She attended reluctantly, still uncomfortable with public attention. The hall was packed with firefighters, many of whom she recognized from different stations. When her name was called and she stepped onto the stage, the department chief held up something she hadn't expected to see. It was a framed picture, old and carefully preserved. Inside, there was a faded photograph of a young female firefighter from the 1950s, smiling at the camera with the same fierce confidence that Sarah recognized in herself. Below the photo, a call-up badge was inscribed, Eagle 7. The chief began to tell a story Sarah had never heard. That woman in the photograph was Margaret Hayes, one of New York's first female firefighters, who had served at a time when the profession was almost exclusively male. Margaret Hayes had died in the line of duty in 1957, rescuing children from a burning orphanage. Before her death, she had saved over 100 lives throughout her career. Her call sign, Eagle 7, had been retired as a tribute. No one was to wear it again. But 40 years later, when Sarah joined the department, there was an error in the registration system. Her call sign was processed as Eagle 7, and no one realized the significance until long after she had already established her own reputation with that name. The chief explained that when the skyscraper fire occurred and reports began to come in about Eagle 7's actions, some of the most veteran firefighters recognized the pattern. The impossible courage, the refusal to abandon lives, the ability to make decisions that defied logic, but saved people. It was as if Margaret Hayes had returned, as if her spirit had found a new vessel. Sarah felt tears burning in her eyes as she held that photograph. She had never believed in destiny or mystical signs, but there was something deeply moving in knowing that she had shared not just a badge, but a legacy with that courageous woman from decades ago. The department had decided that Eagle 7 would no longer be retired. Instead, it would be passed on, generation after generation, to firefighters who demonstrated the same unwavering commitment to preserving human life. The ceremony ended with a standing ovation that lasted for minutes, but the real impact came later. When young recruits began to seek out Sarah, they wanted to hear her stories, learn from her experience, understand how she made those impossible decisions amidst the chaos. One young woman in particular, fresh out of the academy, looked at Sarah with eyes shining with admiration and said something that would be forever etched in her memory. It didn't matter if it was her or someone else. But someday she wanted to be worthy of carrying Eagle 7. Sarah realized then that her legacy would not only be the 164 lives she had saved that terrible night. It would be much greater. It would be every firefighter she trained, every lesson she shared, every moment she inspired someone to be braver, more dedicated, more willing to risk everything for a stranger. Margaret Hayes would live on through her, and Sarah would live on through countless others who would come after. She returned home that night, clutching the painting to her chest. Her back still ached, a constant reminder of that night 3 years ago. But the pain had a new meaning now. It was the physical mark of a purpose fulfilled, of a promise kept to people she had never met, but who had depended on her during the darkest moment of their lives. It was proof that when the world was on fire, there were people willing to run towards the flames instead of fleeing from them. Sarah Mitchell hung the framed photograph on the wall of her small apartment, alongside her own awards and certificates. But every night, before bed, it was to that old photograph that her eyes turned, to the face of Margaret Hayes, a woman she had never met, but who had somehow always been with her. And somewhere in the mysterious vastness between past and present, between duty fulfilled and legacy left behind, two women separated by decades but united by courage shared a bond that time could never break. Eagle 7 was not just a badge, it was a promise, a silent oath that as long as there was fire, there would be those brave enough to face it, and as long as there were lives in danger, there would be heroes willing to risk their own without hesitation. The months that followed the ceremony brought profound changes for Sarah. She woke up every morning with the sun rising over the rooftops of New York, and her first thought invariably returned to those 6 hours of hell that had transformed her life. The scars on her back had become as much a part of her identity as the Eagle 7 badge she now carried with a whole new weight of responsibility and history. The work in the training department proved more challenging than she had imagined. It wasn't just about teaching firefighting techniques or rescue protocols. It was about shaping minds, preparing hearts for impossible decisions, equipping souls for moments when every second meant the difference between life and death. Sarah discovered she had a natural talent for it. Her voice carried authority earned in countless real-life emergency situations, and the recruits responded to her with genuine respect. She developed increasingly complex simulations, scenarios that forced the trainees to confront agonizing moral dilemmas. In one of them, she replicated exactly the situation on the 18th floor on that fateful night, when she received a direct order to evacuate, but heard screams from trapped people. The recruits had to choose between obeying the command or violating protocol to save lives. There was no right answer, only consequences they would have to live with. Sarah carefully observed how each one reacted, identifying those who possessed not only physical courage, but the moral strength necessary to take responsibility for decisions that would haunt their dreams. A young man named Marcus Thompson stood out in particular. He came from a poor neighborhood in the Bronx, raised solely by his grandmother after losing his parents in a fire when he was 8 years old. That tragedy could have destroyed him, but instead, it forged him into something incredibly resilient. Marcus constantly sought out Sarah, absorbing every scrap of knowledge as if his life depended on it, which technically was true. He asked questions that demonstrated not only intelligence, but a profound understanding of human nature under extreme pressure. Sarah saw much of herself in him. That voracious hunger for practical knowledge, that refusal to accept conventional limitations. She began to mentor Marcus personally, sharing not only techniques but philosophies, not only procedures but principles. Conversations that started about building ventilation tactics often evolved into discussions about fear, about how to recognize it and channel it productively, about the fine line between courage and recklessness. During one of those conversations, Marcus asked something no one else had dared to ask. He wanted to know if Sarah regretted her decisions that night, if the price she had paid with her own health was worth the lives she had saved. She remained silent for a long moment, gazing out the window of the training center as she gathered her thoughts. Then she answered with a brutal honesty that only someone who had truly lived through that experience could offer. She explained that regret was an inadequate word to describe what she felt. There were moments of intense, physical frustration, when her back screamed in pain, and she couldn't do simple things that had once been automatic. There were nights when she woke up sweating, reliving those burning corridors, wondering if she had missed a door, if someone had been left behind. But when she thought of those 164 people living their lives, laughing with families, pursuing dreams, existing because she had made specific choices at that specific moment. There was no room for regret. There was only the certainty that it had been the only possible path. Marcus absorbed those words like gospel. He graduated at the top of his class and was assigned to one of Brooklyn's busiest stations. Sarah watched his progress with maternal pride, though they kept in sporadic contact due to the intense demands of both their schedules. But on a cold winter morning, 2 years after his graduation, Marcus showed up at her office unannounced, still wearing his soot-covered uniform. There was a fire in an apartment complex, he reported, his voice still trembling with adrenaline. A mother and 3 children were trapped on the 5th floor, the flames blocking all conventional escape routes. Marcus had made an instant decision based on something Sarah had taught him about weak structural points in old buildings. He had created an opening through an adjacent wall, reaching the family and evacuating them seconds before the ceiling collapsed. 4 lives saved, because he had remembered a specific lesson she had shared during a random afternoon of training. Sarah felt something expand in her chest as she listened to Marcus recount every detail. It was the concrete realization that her impact transcended her own direct actions. Through Marcus, through hundreds of other firefighters she had trained, her legacy multiplied exponentially. She was saving lives even without entering burning buildings, even with her physical limitations. Margaret Hayes had done the same through her, and now she was doing the same through an entire generation of first responders. The department began consulting her on increasingly complex cases. When particularly challenging fires occurred, commanders would call Sarah seeking her analysis, her unique perspective forged in real-world experience. She became a kind of living legend, the firefighter who had defied the impossible and survived to teach others to do the same. But Sarah never allowed herself to be consumed by her own mythology. She kept her feet firmly planted in reality, constantly reminding herself that heroism was just a sophisticated name for doing what was necessary when no one else could or wanted to. On a particular spring afternoon, 5 years after that night that had changed everything, Sarah visited the site where the skyscraper used to stand. The structure had been completely demolished after the fire, deemed beyond repair. In its place, there was now a memorial, a small but beautifully designed park with plaques, commemorating the heroic efforts of the firefighters and paramedics. She walked slowly along the paved paths, reading the names engraved in the granite, recognizing colleagues who had fought alongside her that night. An elderly woman approached her hesitantly, recognizing her face from old newspaper photographs. She was one of the building's residents, one of the 164. She gripped Sarah's hands with surprising strength and began to speak, words stumbling over one another in the urgency of being uttered. She recounted that her granddaughter had been born 6 months after the fire, that she had witnessed the girl's first day of school, that she had just turned 4. None of this would have been possible without that night, without that unknown firefighter who had dragged her through the smoke when she had already given up on living. Sarah embraced the woman, as tears streamed down both their faces. It was in moments like these that the abstraction of 164 lives became concrete, that numbers turned into faces, statistics into stories. Each of those people had an infinitely complex web of relationships, dreams, and unrealized potential that would have been extinguished if she hadn't done what she did. The weight of that responsibility was both overwhelming and liberating. The woman eventually left, but Sarah remained at the memorial for hours, watching families stroll, children play, life unfolding simply because she had refused to let it end prematurely. The sun began to set, painting the New York sky with shades of orange and red that inevitably reminded her of flames, but now without the associated terror, just beauty existing because beauty deserved to exist. When she finally stood up to leave, Sarah felt something different. The chronic pain in her back was still there, probably would be forever. The memories of that night still haunted her occasionally, probably always would, but there was peace now, a profound acceptance that her journey, however painful it had been, had served a purpose greater than herself. Margaret Hayes had lived and died for it. Sarah had risked everything for it. Marcus and countless others would continue the tradition. Eagle 7 was not merely a badge shared between 2 women separated by time. It was a symbol of something fundamental in human nature, that inexplicable spark that makes some people run toward danger when all instincts scream to flee. It was proof that heroism was not a supernatural gift, but a conscious choice repeated countless times until it became an inseparable part of one's character. Sarah walked through the streets of Manhattan as the city lit up its nightlights. Millions of lives unfolding in apartments and offices, each precious, each worth any sacrifice necessary to preserve it. She knew that somewhere in that immense city, an alarm would soon sound. Firefighters would awaken and rush to danger. Some of these people she had trained, personally. All carried the legacy of countless heroes who came before. And when Sarah finally arrived home, she looked once more at that photograph of Margaret Hayes hanging on her wall. 2 women, 2 eras, 1 eternal promise. She smiled, a small but genuine smile of someone who knew with absolute certainty that her life had meaning, that her choices mattered, that Eagle 7 would live on far beyond her, passing from one generation of firefighters to the next, carrying with it the message, a simple yet profound thought. Some things are worth every scar, every nightmare, every sacrifice. Human life was one of those things. It always had been. It always would be.